I was sitting on a cold sidewalk, my hands trembling around a paper cup, when my future daughter-in-law looked straight at me and said something so cruel, so empty of humanity that my heart didn't just break. It went still. "People like you," she whispered, wrinkling her nose, "are exactly why society never improves." She turned away like I was nothing. What she didn't know was that I wasn't homeless. I was Daisy Whitmore, and I had just tested the woman my son planned to marry. I thought I was looking for kindness. What I found was something far more dangerous. If this moment already made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you have walked past me too? And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always read every story. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe family stories like this matter. My name is Daisy Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and until a few years ago, I lived a life that most people would describe as comfortable, perhaps even enviable. My late husband Arthur and I spent over 4 decades building a business from nothing. What started as a small home decor boutique in Charleston slowly grew into a respected brand known for elegance, craftsmanship, and a certain warmth that reflected who we were as a couple. But after Arthur passed away, everything changed. Not the business, I still had capable people running it. Not the house, I still lived in the same quiet, sunlit place filled with memories. What changed was the silence. The kind of silence that lingers too long in the evenings. The kind that reminds you that the person who once shared every decision, every glance, every quiet cup of coffee is no longer there. For a while, my son Ethan filled that silence. Ethan Whitmore is 41 years old, a pediatric surgeon and the greatest pride of my life. He has his father's steady hands and my stubborn heart. Growing up, he was the kind of child who would bring home injured birds and insist on nursing them back to health. That compassion never left him. Even now, after long shifts at the hospital, he still calls to check on me, at least he used to. Things began to change about 8 months ago. That was when Ethan first mentioned Chloe Bennett. I met someone he told me over dinner one evening, his voice carrying a note I hadn't heard in years. Hope, excitement. The quiet thrill of possibility. I remember smiling. Of course I did. What mother wouldn't? After everything he had given to his career, after all the nights he spent alone, I wanted nothing more than for him to find someone who truly understood him. When I first met Chloe, I understood immediately why Ethan was drawn to her. She was beautiful in a polished, effortless way. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a calm, confident posture, and a voice that seemed to glide rather than speak. She worked as an event planner, specializing in high-end weddings and corporate gatherings. She knew how to present herself. Every word was measured, every gesture deliberate, and she was kind. At least she appeared to be. She hugged me warmly when we met, complimented my home, asked thoughtful questions about my life with Arthur. She even laughed at my stories the way polite young women are taught to do, but something about it felt rehearsed. I couldn't explain it at first. There was no single moment, no obvious misstep, just a faint, persistent feeling in the back of my mind, like a note in a song that didn't quite belong. The first real crack appeared during a small dinner at a local restaurant about 2 weeks later. It was nothing special, just the 3 of us. Ethan had just come off a long shift, and Chloe had chosen the place a trendy spot downtown that prided itself on its intimate atmosphere. The waiter, a young man who looked barely 20, made a small mistake with our order. He apologized immediately, clearly nervous. Ethan smiled as he always does and told him not to worry. I did the same. But Chloe didn't. Her smile didn't disappear. That was the strange part. It stayed perfectly in place as she looked at him, but her eyes changed. They hardened just for a second. "It's really not that complicated," she said lightly, her tone still pleasant. "We're paying for a certain level of service." The boy flushed red, apologized again, and hurried away. Ethan didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he chose not to say anything. I told myself it was nothing. People have bad days. Perhaps she was stressed. Perhaps I was imagining things. But then it happened again and again. Little moments, small, almost invisible shifts, a tone that was too sharp when speaking to staff, a flicker of irritation when something didn't go exactly as planned, and always that perfect smile when she turned back to Ethan. It wasn't just how she treated people. It was what she talked about, money. Not directly, not in a way that would raise immediate suspicion, but subtly, persistently. How complicated are estates usually, she asked me once over coffee, stirring her cup slowly. I mean, when someone has built something substantial over time. I remember pausing just for a moment. It depends, I said carefully. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, she replied quickly, smiling. I just think it's important for families to avoid confusion later on. You hear so many stories, you know. Things getting messy when older generations don't simplify in time. Simplify. That word stayed with me. A few days later, she brought it up again, this time framed as concern. I just want Ethan to have peace of mind, she said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He already has such a stressful job. The last thing he needs is uncertainty about long-term things. Ethan squeezed her hand, clearly touched, and I sat there watching her, feeling that same quiet unease grow, just a little stronger. It wasn't what she said. It was how often she said it, and how carefully she said it when Ethan was present. But the moment that truly unsettled me happened in my own home. I had invited them over for Sunday brunch, a tradition Arthur and I had started years ago, and one I had tried to maintain after his passing. The house was warm, filled with sunlight, the table set with the same china I had used for decades. Chloe arrived in a soft cream dress, elegant as always. She complimented everything, the food, the decor, the view from the dining room windows. And then halfway through the meal, she asked a question that changed everything. So Daisy, she said casually, dabbing her lips with a napkin, have you ever thought about consolidating things? I looked at her. I'm not sure I understand. Well, she continued smoothly. You've built so much. Properties, business assets, investments. It must be a lot to manage, especially alone. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. I'm fine, I said calmly. Of course, she said quickly. I didn't mean anything by it. I just think sometimes it's easier for everyone if things are organized ahead of time. You know, for the future. The future, she smiled again. But this time I didn't smile back, because for the first time I realized something clearly. Chloe Bennett wasn't just curious, she was calculating, and whatever she was planning, it involved my son and me. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't confront her. I didn't even let my expression change. But that night, sitting alone in the quiet of my living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not loneliness, something sharper, something colder. Doubt. And the beginning of a question I couldn't ignore anymore. Who exactly was the woman my son was about to marry? If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that instincts, especially the quiet ones, rarely arrive without reason. I didn't sleep well that night after Chloe's question. Have you ever thought about consolidating things? It echoed in my mind not because of the words themselves, but because of the timing, the tone, the precision. It wasn't curiosity. It was positioning. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called Richard Lawson. Richard has been my attorney for over 25 years. He handled everything from our early business contracts to Arthur's estate when he passed. More than that, he's one of the few people who knew me before I became Mrs. Whitmore, before success, before recognition. He knows how I think. And more importantly, he knows when something is wrong, even when I struggle to say it out loud. Daisy, he said when he answered, his voice calm as ever. This is an early call. Everything all right? I hesitated for a moment. I'm not sure, I admitted. That's why I'm calling. There was a pause on the line, not uncomfortable, but attentive. Tell me what's on your mind. I told him everything. Not in dramatic terms, not with accusations, just the facts. Chloe's questions, her tone, the way she seemed to steer conversations, the subtle shifts in her behavior depending on who she was speaking to. Richard didn't interrupt. He never does. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. All right, he said. Let me ask you something first. Do you feel threatened? The question surprised me. Not physically, I said, but something doesn't feel right. That's enough for me to take this seriously. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling both relief and a growing sense of unease. Have you ever heard of her before I asked? Chloe Bennett. There was a short silence, and then something in his voice changed just slightly. I can't say for certain, he said carefully, but the name. It's not entirely unfamiliar. My grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean, a few years ago, he continued, I consulted on a case involving an elderly client, widowed, financially stable. There were concerns raised about undue influence. Nothing was proven, and the case never went to court. But there were irregularities. My heart began to beat faster. Was she involved? I don't have direct evidence of that, he said. But I remember a younger woman in the periphery. Someone close to the situation. I didn't handle the full case personally, so I'd need to look into it again to be sure. But the name I pressed. It could be coincidence, he replied. Bennett isn't exactly rare, but I've learned not to ignore coincidences when patterns are involved. Patterns. That word settled heavily in my chest. I don't want to accuse her of anything, I said quietly. Ethan loves her. I can see that, and I don't want to become that mother. The one who interferes, Richard asked gently. Yes. There was a pause. Daisy. He said, his tone firm but kind. There's a difference between interference and protection. You're not questioning her because you dislike her. You're questioning her because something doesn't add up. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. I just wish I had something concrete. Then let's find it, he said simply. His confidence steadied me, but it also meant something else. This wasn't just in my head. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention than ever before. Not in an obvious way. I didn't follow Chloe or confront her. I simply observed. And what I saw only confirmed my unease. A week later, we had another family gathering, this time a brunch at Ethan's place. Chloe had organized everything, of course. She has a way of taking control of situations that people often mistake for competence. Perhaps it is competence, but there's something else beneath it, something sharper. When I arrived, everything was perfect. The table was set with elegant precision. Fresh flowers, coordinated dishes, soft music playing in the background. Chloe greeted me with her usual warmth, kissing my cheek lightly. Daisy. I'm so glad you came, she said. Her voice was gentle, her smile flawless, and for a moment I wondered if I had imagined everything. But then I noticed the details. I always notice the details. During brunch, she guided every conversation. If someone brought up a neutral topic, she would subtly redirect it. If Ethan spoke about work, she praised him beautifully, convincingly, but always in a way that emphasized how much responsibility he carried. You sacrifice so much, she told him, her hand resting on his arm. It must be exhausting to carry everything on your own. On your own. It was a small phrase, but it lingered. Later, she turned to me. Daisy? She said, her tone curious. How did you manage everything after Arthur passed, the business, the properties? All of it, I smiled politely. One step at a time, that must have been overwhelming, she said softly. It was difficult, I admitted. And you still manage everything yourself, she asked. There it was again. Not concern. Assessment. I have help where I need it, I replied. She nodded slowly as if filing the information away. Of course, that makes sense. Then she smiled again and the conversation moved on. But I didn't move on, because I had seen it clearly this time. She wasn't just asking questions. She was gathering information, piece by piece. Later that afternoon, after brunch ended and Ethan stepped out to take a phone call, Chloe and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. She was rinsing dishes, her movements calm and controlled. You raised a remarkable man, she said suddenly without looking at me. Thank you, I replied. He trusts people easily, she continued. There was something about the way she said it that made me pause. Yes, I said carefully. He does. She turned, then meeting my eyes. It's a beautiful quality, she said, but it can also be risky. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled again as if nothing unusual had been said. I just want to protect him, she added lightly. Protect him. From what, from whom? From me, I didn't ask. Because in that moment, I understood something with chilling clarity. Chloe Bennett wasn't just positioning herself in Ethan's life. She was positioning herself between us. And whatever she was planning, she didn't see me as family. She saw me as an obstacle. That evening, I called Richard again. "I think you're right," I told him quietly. There was no hesitation in his response. "Then we proceed carefully." "How?" I asked. There was a pause. And then he said something that would change everything. Sometimes, Richard said, the fastest way to understand who someone truly is to remove everything they think they're gaining. I frowned slightly. I'm not sure I follow. If Chloe believes she's entering a family with stability, wealth, and influence, he continued, then her behavior is shaped by that belief. But what happens? If those things disappear, my heart skipped. I mean, he said calmly, what would she do if she believed you had nothing to offer? The room felt suddenly very still. I thought about Chloe's questions, her calculations, her careful attention to assets' inheritance structure, and then I imagined her face, if all of that was gone. "I don't know," I said slowly. Then perhaps Richard replied, "It's time to find out." That night I sat alone in my bedroom staring at my reflection, at the woman I had become over the years, composed, dignified, controlled, and for the first time in a long time I considered becoming someone else entirely, not to deceive, not out of malice, but to reveal the truth. Because if Chloe Bennett was building something around my son, I needed to know exactly what that foundation was made of, and how easily it might collapse. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in Arthur's study, the same room where we had once made decisions that shaped our entire lives, business deals, investments, plans for Ethan's future. The leather chair still creaked the same way when I leaned back. His books were still arranged exactly as he had left them. Even his reading glasses sat untouched on the desk, as if he might walk in at any moment and ask why I was sitting in the dark. But he wouldn't, and for the first time in a long time, I wished he were there, not to make the decision for me, but to tell me I wasn't wrong for feeling the way I did, because what I was considering didn't feel like something a mother should have to do: test the woman her son loved, disguise herself, lie. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. "Am I overreacting?" I whispered into the silence. There was no answer, of course, only memory. Arthur had always been the more cautious one between us. I was the instinct, he was the analysis. I trusted my gut, he verified it, and together we were rarely wrong. But now I had only half of that balance, and yet the feeling wouldn't go away. Chloe's voice, her questions, the way she watched me, not with affection, but with quiet evaluation. And then there was Ethan, my sweet, kind, trusting son. The boy who once cried for a stray dog, the man who now spent his days saving children's lives. He had given so much of himself to the world, and in return he believed the world would be kind back. That belief terrified me, because I had lived long enough to know it wasn't always true. The next morning, I called Ethan. "Hi, Mom." He answered, his voice warm but distracted. I could hear movement in the background papers, perhaps, or the low hum of hospital equipment. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently. "Are you busy?" "A little," he admitted. "But I can talk for a minute. What's going on?" I hesitated. This was the moment I had been avoiding. "I wanted to talk about Chloe," I said carefully. There was a brief pause. What about her? His tone had already shifted. Not defensive yet, but guarded. I searched for the right words. "I feel like things are moving very quickly, and I want to make sure you're—" "Mom," he interrupted, a soft edge creeping into his voice. "We've talked about this." "I know," I said quickly, "and I'm not trying to interfere. She makes me happy," he said firmly. "Isn't that what matters?" "It does," I said. "Of course it does, but happiness." "Then why does it feel like you're looking for reasons to doubt her?" he asked. The words hit harder than I expected. "I'm not looking for reasons," I said quietly. "I'm noticing things," like what he pressed. I opened my mouth and then closed it again. Because how do you explain a feeling? How do you tell your son that the woman he loves feels wrong in ways you can't yet prove? She just asks a lot of questions about things. I said finally, about the house, about finances, about the future. "That's normal," Ethan replied immediately. "We're getting married. We're building a life together. Those are conversations people have. Yes, I said slowly, but it's the way she asks them. There was silence on the line, and then he sighed. Mom, I think you're reading too much into it. My chest tightened. I don't think I am. I think you are, he said more firmly now, and I think maybe this is just hard for you. Hard, I repeated softly. Yeah, he said, losing Dad, being alone, seeing me move forward. I get it, I really do. But Chloe isn't the problem. The words settled between us like something heavy and final. I'm not alone, I said quietly. I know he replied, but his voice had softened in a way that made it worse. I just don't want you to push her away because of assumptions. Assumptions, I swallowed. I would never do anything to hurt you, I said. I know, he said again, but questioning her like this, it feels like you don't trust my judgment. That was the moment I realized something painful. This wasn't just about Chloe anymore. This was about trust. His trust in me, and mine in him. I trust you, I said, my voice steady, despite the ache in my chest. I just want to be sure the person you're trusting deserves it. He didn't respond immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was quieter. She does, he said. You'll see. I closed my eyes. I hope so, I whispered. We ended the call shortly after that, both of us pretending everything was fine, but it wasn't. Because for the first time in his life, my son had chosen someone else's perspective over mine, and I couldn't blame him. That's what love does. It shifts your center. It makes you defend what you believe in, even when you don't yet see the full picture. That afternoon, I sat in the living room staring at the sunlight stretching across the floor. I thought about Richard's words. What would she do if she believed you had nothing to offer? At the time, it had felt like a strategy. Now, it felt like the only path left, because I couldn't convince Ethan with instincts. I needed truth. Clear, undeniable, unarguable truth. And if Chloe Bennett truly cared about him, not his position, not his future, not what came with his name, then a simple test would prove it. She would show kindness, basic human kindness, not the polished kind reserved for people who matter, but the real kind, the kind you give to someone who has nothing, someone invisible, someone like... I stood slowly and walked to the mirror. For a long moment, I simply looked at myself, at the woman I had spent decades becoming. Graceful, composed, respected, and then I imagined stripping all of that away. No elegant clothes, no carefully styled hair, no recognition, no identity, just a stranger. A woman on the street, tired, overlooked, unimportant. Would Chloe still be kind, or would she reveal something else entirely? My heart pounded at the thought, because this wasn't just a test of Chloe. It was a test of something deeper, of whether the instincts I had trusted my entire life were still worth believing, of whether I was protecting my son or pushing him away. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard. He answered on the second ring. Daisy. I'm going to do it, I said. There was no need to explain. He understood immediately. All right, he said calmly. Then we do this carefully. I don't want this to turn into something ugly, I added. It won't, he assured me. We're not setting a trap. We're observing behavior. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I just need to know the truth. And you will, he said. After we hung up, I made one more call. Gloria, I said when she answered. Well, if it isn't Daisy Whitmore calling me before dinner, she replied with her usual playful tone. This must be serious. It is, I said. There was a pause. All right, she said, her voice shifting. Tell me. I took a deep breath. I need your help to become someone else. Another pause. And then slowly Gloria said, Oh, now that sounds interesting. I walked back to the mirror looking at my reflection one last time. Because I knew. The next time I looked like myself again, something would be different. Not just in Chloe, but in me. Gloria Hayes had always believed that the right costume could reveal more truth than any confession. She said it the moment I told her what I needed. You're not hiding who you are, Daisy, she said, standing in the middle of her cluttered but charming studio. You're giving people the chance to show you who they are. Her studio sat above a small community theater in downtown Charleston, the kind of place that smelled faintly of dust fabric and old memories. Racks of clothing lined the walls, decades of costumes from productions long finished. There were wigs on stands, boxes of shoes, makeup kits stacked in neat rows. It was a world built entirely on transformation, and I was about to become part of it. I still don't know if this is right, I admitted, running my fingers over a worn wool coat hanging from a rack. Gloria gave me a look, half amused, half knowing. If you were completely sure, I'd be worried, she said. The fact that you're questioning it means you still have a conscience. That's a good thing. I don't want to humiliate her, I said quietly. And you won't, Gloria replied, unless she humiliates herself. That settled something in me. Not entirely, but enough. We spent the next several hours preparing. It wasn't just about clothes. That was the first thing Gloria made clear. Anyone can put on a ragged coat, she said. But people don't respond to clothes alone. They respond to posture, to energy, to the story you carry in your body. So we started there. Stand up, she instructed. I did. Now she continued, show me Daisy Whitmore. I straightened instinctively, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, calm, controlled presence, the version of myself I had carried for years without thinking. Gloria nodded. Good. Now, let her go. I frowned slightly. Let her go, I repeated. Just for a moment, she said gently, forget who you are. Forget what you've built. Imagine you've spent years being overlooked, ignored, passed by. Something tightened in my chest. I don't know if I can do that. Yes, you do, she said softly. You've just never had to. I hesitated, and then I tried. I let my shoulders drop, just a little at first, then more. My spine curved slightly, not from weakness, but from something deeper habit, perhaps. The habit of making yourself smaller so others don't notice you too much. Gloria watched closely. Good, she said. Now your eyes, my eyes. They're still daisies, she said. They're still confident, seen. You need to dim them. That part was harder, because how do you dim a lifetime of being seen? But I understood what she meant. I thought about the stories I had read, the people I had passed on sidewalks without truly seeing, the quiet invisibility that comes when the world decides you don't matter. And slowly, something shifted. My gaze dropped. Not completely, but enough. Gloria stepped closer, studying me carefully. There it is, she said quietly. That's her. A strange feeling washed over me. Not pride, not satisfaction. Something else. Something uncomfortable. Who is she? I asked. Gloria tilted her head slightly. Someone the world stopped looking at a long time ago. We didn't speak for a moment after that. Then Gloria clapped her hands lightly. All right, she said, returning to her usual brisk tone. Now let's finish the job. The clothing came next. Layer by layer, she built the image. A faded, oversized sweater. A worn coat with frayed edges. Loose, mismatched pants. Shoes that looked like they had seen years of use. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing theatrical. That's the mistake people make, Gloria explained. They go too far. Real hardship is subtle. It doesn't scream. It fades. Then came the hair. A dull gray wig, slightly uneven, with strands that didn't quite sit right. Makeup, if you could call it that, was minimal but precise. Shadows under the eyes, slight discoloration, enough to suggest exhaustion without looking artificial. When she was done, she stepped back. Look, she said, gesturing toward the mirror. I hesitated before turning, because a part of me already knew. This wasn't just a disguise. It was a transformation. Slowly I faced the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked older than I felt. Not in years, but in weight. There was a heaviness to her expression, a quiet resignation. Her clothes hung loosely, her posture slightly curved her eyes, softer but not in a peaceful way, in a tired way. Say something, Gloria said gently. I swallowed. Excuse me, I said, my voice uncertain. Gloria shook her head. Too steady, she said. Try again, less confidence. More hesitation. I tried again. Excuse me, do you know where I stopped? Because the voice didn't sound like mine. It was quieter, less certain, as if every word needed permission before it was spoken. Gloria smiled faintly. That's it, she said. A chill ran through me, because for the first time I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about how people saw her, it was about how she had learned to see herself. We spent another hour refining small details, how I held my hands, how I walked slower, more careful as if conserving energy, how I avoided eye contact just enough to seem unnoticed. Every movement mattered, every detail told a story. By the time we finished, I was exhausted, not physically, emotionally. This feels heavier than I expected, I admitted, sitting down slowly. Gloria nodded. It should, she said. You're stepping into a life most people try very hard not to think about. I looked down at my hands. They don't see them, I said quietly. Who? People like her, I replied. They don't see them as people. Gloria didn't answer. She didn't need to, because I already knew. That evening, I met with Richard to finalize the plan. We sat in his office, the familiar scent of polished wood and paper grounding me slightly after the day I'd had. You'll need to be careful, he said. This isn't about confrontation. It's about observation. I understand, I said. We've arranged the timing, he continued. Chloe will be at the bridal boutique tomorrow afternoon. You'll position yourself outside. Natural interaction. Nothing forced. And if she ignores me, I asked. Then that tells you something, he replied. And if she doesn't, I pressed. Richard met my eyes. Then that tells you even more. I nodded slowly. There was one more thing. What if she recognizes me, I asked. It's unlikely, he said. But if she does, you walk away. Immediately. No escalation. All right. We sat in silence for a moment. Daisy, he said finally, are you sure you're ready for this? I thought about that question. About Ethan. About Chloe. About the woman I had seen in the mirror. No, I said honestly. Richard gave a small understanding smile. Good, he said. That means you're taking it seriously. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. For a few moments, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to steady my thoughts. This was it. There would be no more speculation after today. No more doubt, just truth. I got up slowly and walked to the mirror. For a brief second, I saw myself, Daisy Whitmore. And then, as I began to dress piece by piece, she disappeared. Replaced by someone else, someone quieter, someone unseen. By the time I stepped outside, the world felt different, colder somehow, not in temperature, in attention. People passed me on the sidewalk without a second glance. No smiles, no nods, no acknowledgement, just absence. I stood there for a moment, feeling something settle deep in my chest. This is what it feels like, I thought, to not exist. And then I remembered why I was there. Chloe, my son, the truth. I pulled my coat tighter around me and began to walk, each step slower, smaller, less certain, just as Gloria had taught me. And with every step, one thought echoed quietly in my mind. By the end of today, I will know who she really is. By the time I reached the bridal boutique, my heart was beating so loudly I was certain someone would hear it. It sat on a quiet, polished street, one of those places where everything looks curated, intentional, expensive, without trying too hard. The kind of place Chloe loved. Clean windows, soft lighting, dresses displayed like art behind glass. I stood across the street at first, not because I needed to, but because I wasn't ready. A young couple walked past me without a glance. A woman holding a small dog tightened her grip on the leash as she approached, subtly pulling it closer to her side before crossing to the other sidewalk. A man in a tailored suit stepped around me as if I were a misplaced object, not a person. No one looked at my face. No one met my eyes. It happened so naturally, so effortlessly. And for a brief moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not quite, but a heavy, quiet understanding. This is what it means to disappear in plain sight. I lowered my gaze, adjusted the worn coat around my shoulders, and crossed the street. The boutique door opened and Chloe stepped out. She looked exactly as I expected. Perfect. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, her posture straight, her movements graceful. She carried 2 garment bags carefully draped over her arm, likely containing dresses for fittings. Even in something as simple as stepping onto the sidewalk, she looked composed, like someone who belonged in a world where everything was controlled. For a second, I hesitated. This was the moment. I could still walk away. I could still pretend none of this mattered. But then I thought of Ethan, and I took a step forward. "Excuse me," I said softly. My voice came out just as Gloria had trained it, uncertain, careful, almost apologetic. Chloe didn't respond immediately. She kept walking. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding harder now. "Excuse me, ma'am." I tried again, a little louder, but still hesitant. This time she stopped. Not because she wanted to, because she was annoyed. I saw it in the way her shoulders tightened slightly before she turned. Her eyes scanned me quickly, top to bottom, assessing, categorizing, dismissing. "Yes," she said, just one word, flat, impatient. I swallowed, keeping my gaze lowered. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, my hands tightening slightly around the small paper cup I held. "I was wondering if you might know where the nearest shelter is, or maybe somewhere I could get something to eat." There was a pause, a brief, quiet pause, and in that pause I felt something fragile inside me hold its breath, because this was it. This was the moment where she could choose kindness, or not. Chloe shifted the garment bags slightly, as if they were more important than the conversation already. Then she took a small step back. Not a large one, but enough. "I don't know," she said, her tone clipped. "You should probably ask someone else." I nodded quickly. "Of course," I said softly. "I just thought—" "Well, you thought wrong," she interrupted. The words weren't loud, but they landed hard. I felt a flicker of heat rise in my chest, but I forced it down. "Stay in character, stay calm. I understand," I said, lowering my head further. "I just haven't eaten since yesterday," and Chloe's expression changed. Not to concern, to irritation. "Look," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "I'm not carrying cash, all right. And even if I was, I wouldn't just hand it out to someone I don't know. I'm not asking for money," I said quickly. "Just directions." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "People like you always say that," she muttered. My fingers tightened around the cup. "People like me," I repeated quietly. She glanced around briefly, as if checking who might be within earshot. Then she leaned slightly closer, not enough to seem aggressive, but enough that her words felt deliberate. "You know exactly what I mean," she said. Her voice was low now, controlled, cold. "You stand out here pretending to be helpless, hoping someone feels guilty enough to give you something. It's manipulative." The word echoed in my ears. Manipulative. I forced myself to stay still. "I'm not pretending," I said softly. Chloe tilted her head, studying me again. This time there was no effort to hide the disdain in her eyes. "Sure," she said, "because people end up like this by accident, right?" She gestured vaguely toward me, my clothes, my posture, my entire existence. "No," she continued, her voice sharpening slightly. "It's usually a series of bad decisions. Laziness, lack of discipline." Each word struck like a small, precise blow. I felt something in my chest tighten, not just as Daisy, but as the woman I was pretending to be. Because for a moment, it didn't feel like pretending anymore. "I just need a little help," I whispered. Chloe's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she said it. The sentence that would stay with me long after everything else faded. "People like you," she said quietly, "are exactly why society never improves." Time seemed to stop. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like something inside me had gone still. She straightened, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I have somewhere to be," she added, her voice returning to its earlier polished tone. "You should try one of the churches a few blocks over. They deal with situations like yours. Situations like yours." I nodded slowly. "Thank you," I said. Even though she hadn't helped, even though every word she had spoken carried more judgment than compassion. She didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away. And just like that, I no longer existed. I stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear down the street. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, from what I had just witnessed. I had expected indifference, perhaps even mild discomfort, but this was something else entirely. This was deliberate, measured, believed. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, and that was when I heard it. Chloe's voice. Again. Not directed at me this time. On the phone. I hadn't noticed her stop just around the corner. I moved carefully, staying close to the wall just enough to hear without being seen. "Yes, I just left." She was saying, her tone completely different now. Lighter, focused, calculating. A pause. "No, she still hasn't done anything," she continued, "but we need to move soon." My heart skipped. Another pause. "I'm telling you, if we wait too long, the old woman might change the paperwork." The old woman. A cold wave moved through me. She was talking about me. "I don't care if he's ready." Chloe went on, her voice tightening slightly. "He'll sign what I put in front of him. He trusts me." My breath caught. Then more quietly, "We just need everything secured before anything changes. Once it's done, it's done." There was a long pause. And then she said something that made my stomach turn. "Relax. I know exactly what I'm doing." The call ended. I pressed myself against the wall, my mind racing. This wasn't just about cruelty. This wasn't just about character. This was a plan. And my son was in the center of it. I stepped back slowly, my legs feeling weaker than before. Not from the act, from the truth. Because whatever doubts I had before, they were gone now, replaced by something far more dangerous. Certainty. And the terrifying realization that I might already be running out of time. I didn't remember walking back to the car. One moment, I was pressed against the cool brick wall, listening to Chloe's voice unravel something I had only feared. And the next, I was sitting behind the wheel, my hands still trembling against the steering wheel. For a long time, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, because once I moved, this would all become real, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. The words replayed in my mind over and over again. The old woman might change the paperwork. He'll sign what I put in front of him. Once it's done, it's done. I closed my eyes. She wasn't just curious about finances. She wasn't just calculating. She was planning something deliberate, something timed. And Ethan, my Ethan, was completely unaware. A sharp wave of guilt hit me. Had I waited too long, had I dismissed the early signs as intuition, instead of acting sooner, I forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help him. Clarity would. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, my fingers still slightly unsteady as I dialed Richard. He answered immediately. "Daisy, I need you to listen carefully." I said, my voice low but controlled. "I just had the first encounter." There was a brief pause, and he asked. "She failed," I said. The words felt heavier than I expected, not because I had hoped she would pass, but because part of me still needed to believe that I was wrong. "What happened?" Richard asked. I told him everything, every word Chloe had said, every look, every tone, and then the phone call. I repeated it exactly as I remembered, my voice tightening slightly as I spoke. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Not disbelief, not surprise, something else. Confirmation. "That's very concerning," Richard said finally. "That's not just concerning," I replied quietly. "That's a plan." "Yes," he said, "it sounds like one." I gripped the phone tighter. "She said he would sign whatever she put in front of him." "I heard you," Richard said. "And she's worried I might change the paperwork," I added. "She's watching me, Richard. She's tracking what I do." "I think you're right," he said calmly, "which means we need to move carefully from here." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "What do we do?" "We gather more," he said. "I already have enough," I insisted. "This is more than suspicion." "It is," he agreed. "But if you want to protect Ethan and ensure he believes you, you need more than your word. You need something undeniable." I knew he was right. That didn't make it easier. "He won't believe me," I said quietly. "Not like this." "Not yet," Richard said, "but he will." I leaned back against the seat, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. "She was cold," I said after a moment. "Not just dismissive, deliberate, like she believed every word she was saying." "That's often the most dangerous kind of person," Richard replied, "the ones who justify their behavior." I nodded slowly. "There's more," I said. "Go on." "I saw her meet someone," I continued. "After the call, in the parking garage behind the boutique, a man." "Did you recognize him?" "No," I said. "But it didn't look casual. It wasn't friendly. It was coordinated." Richard was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "I'll have someone look into that. Description." I closed my eyes, recalling the image. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s, dark hair, medium build. He looked tense, like he didn't want to be there too long. "That's enough to start with," Richard said. We hung up shortly after that, but the conversation stayed with me. We gather more. I didn't want more. I wanted it to stop. I wanted to go back to a version of reality where Chloe Bennett was simply a woman my son loved. Not someone who spoke about him like a transaction waiting to be finalized. But that version didn't exist anymore. The truth had already begun to surface, and I couldn't ignore it. That evening, I returned home and removed the disguise slowly, piece by piece. The coat, the sweater, the wig. Each item felt heavier than it had that morning. When I finally stood in front of the mirror again, I expected relief. But what I felt instead was something more complicated. Because even though I looked like Daisy Whitmore again, I didn't feel the same. I had seen something I couldn't unsee. Not just in Chloe, in the world, in the way people move past those they don't value, in the way a person can disappear simply by losing status. I placed my hands on the edge of the sink and leaned forward slightly. "Get it together," I whispered to myself. This wasn't about me. It was about Ethan. The next day, Richard called me earlier than expected. "I have something," he said. My heart skipped. "Already, yes," he replied. "The man you saw, his name is Marcus Bennett." My stomach tightened. "Bennett," I repeated. "Yes," Richard said, "Chloe's brother." The room felt suddenly smaller. "She never mentioned a brother," I said. "Not surprising," he replied. "From what I've found, he's had legal issues." "What kind of issues?" Financial Richard said. "Fraud-related allegations. Nothing that resulted in a conviction, but enough to establish a pattern." A pattern. The word returned again, and this time it felt undeniable. "Are they close?" I asked. "Hard to say," Richard replied. "They don't appear publicly connected in any obvious way. Different addresses, minimal shared records, but that doesn't mean they aren't working together." I closed my eyes. "They are," I said quietly. "You sound certain." "I saw them," I replied. The way they spoke, the way they stood. That wasn't a casual meeting. Richard didn't argue. "Then we proceed under that assumption," he said. I took a deep breath. "What else?" "There are signs Chloe has had multiple short-term relationships in the past," he continued. "Several with men in stable financial positions." My chest tightened. And in each case, the relationship ended abruptly," he said. "No clear reason, no public conflict, just ended." I didn't need him to say it. I already understood. "She moves on before anything can be traced," I murmured. "Possibly," he said, "or before anything becomes complicated." I leaned back slowly. "And now she's with Ethan." "Yes, and she's closer than ever to something permanent." "Yes," Richard said again. The silence that followed was heavy, because there was no longer any room for doubt, no space for optimism, no comforting explanation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't me being overprotective. This was real. And it was dangerous. "Richard," I said quietly, "how far do you think this goes?" There was a pause. Longer this time. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But based on what we have so far enough to be very careful." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Then we keep going," I said. "Yes," he replied. "We keep going." After we ended the call, I sat in silence for a long time, because for the first time since this began, I wasn't just worried, I was afraid, not for myself, for my son. Because Ethan wasn't just in love, he was exposed. And if I didn't act carefully, he wouldn't just lose a relationship, he could lose everything. The second time I put the disguise on, it felt heavier, not because of the clothes, because of what I now knew. The first encounter had taken something from me, something quiet and human that I hadn't realized I still believed in. The idea that even the coldest person might soften when faced with genuine need. Chloe hadn't softened. She had sharpened. And now I was going back. Not to confirm a suspicion, but to understand how far it went. Gloria watched me carefully as I adjusted the coat in front of the mirror. "You're different today," she said. I am, I replied. There was no point pretending otherwise. You've seen something, she added. I met her eyes in the reflection. Yes. She didn't ask for details. That was one of the things I appreciated most about Gloria. She knew when silence was more respectful than curiosity. Just remember, she said gently, you're still observing. Don't let it become something else. I nodded, but deep down I wasn't sure I could stay detached this time. Because now, it was personal. The plan for the second encounter was simple. Chloe had a scheduled tasting appointment at a venue across town, something she had mentioned casually during one of our earlier conversations. A charming event space near a small church that hosted weekly community outreach programs, including a soup line. It wasn't coincidence. It was opportunity. I arrived early. The air was cooler than the day before, carrying that faint crispness that Charleston gets when the seasons begin to shift. I took my position near the side of the church, blending in with a small group of people already waiting quietly. This time I didn't feel like I was pretending. I understood the rhythm now. The waiting, the stillness, the unspoken agreement among strangers who had nothing in common except need. A volunteer moved it through the line, offering cups of coffee and soft words. She smiled at each person, meeting their eyes, calling some by name. That alone struck me. She saw them, really saw them. It made what I was about to witness feel even sharper by contrast. I kept my head down, my posture relaxed into the role. Time passed slowly, and then she arrived. Chloe stepped out of a sleek car, sunglasses perched lightly on her face, her posture as composed as ever. She was speaking to someone on the phone, her tone professional controlled. I'll finalize everything after the tasting, she said. No, I want it perfect. Of course she did. Perfection mattered. Image mattered. I watched as she ended the call and began walking toward the venue entrance. She didn't see me at first. Why would she? I was just another invisible figure near the edge of her world. But as she got closer, something shifted. Recognition. Not of me, of the situation. Her eyes moved briefly across the line of people waiting, and then they stopped. On me. I saw the exact moment she realized, not who I was, but what I represented. The same homeless woman from the day before. Her expression changed instantly, not to surprise, to irritation. A slow, controlled exhale escaped her lips as she adjusted her bag. Then she walked toward me. Not away, toward. That alone made my pulse quicken, because this wasn't avoidance. This was intention. Well, she said, stopping a few feet in front of me. You again. Her voice was low-edged with something sharper than before. I kept my gaze lowered. I didn't mean to bother you, I said softly. She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. That's funny, she replied, because it feels exactly like you are. A few people nearby shifted slightly, sensing the tension, but not fully understanding it. The volunteer I had noticed earlier glanced over her expression, tightening just a little. Good. Someone was watching. I just came for the food, I said quietly. Chloe crossed her arms. Of course you did, she said. That's what this is, right? Just showing up, taking what's offered, moving on. There was something different in her tone now, less controlled, more revealing. I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. I'm just trying to get through the day. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And whose responsibility is that, she asked. I didn't answer, because there was no right answer, not for someone like her. She stepped closer. Let me guess, she continued. Things didn't go your way. You made some bad choices, and now the world is supposed to fix it for you. Each word was measured, each word chosen, not careless, intentional. I didn't ask for this, I said softly. Chloe tilted her head. They never do, she replied. A quiet murmur passed through a couple of people in line, not loud enough to interrupt, but enough to signal discomfort. She ignored it. Of course she did, because in her mind, she wasn't wrong. That was the most chilling part. You know what the real problem is, she went on, lowering her voice slightly. People keep enabling this. She gestured lightly toward the church, the line the volunteer. All of this, she said, it doesn't solve anything. It just keeps people like you exactly where you are. My chest tightened. Not from anger, from the cold certainty in her voice. And where is that? I asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. Dependent, she said. Irrelevant. The words landed harder than the ones from the day before, because this time, she wasn't reacting. She was explaining, revealing a belief system, a worldview, and then she slipped. It happened so quickly, so naturally, she didn't even seem to notice. Honestly, she added her tone, shifting slightly once certain things are in place. People like you won't even be a concern anymore. My heart skipped. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She smiled, not warmly, tightly. You wouldn't understand, she said. It's about structure, control, making sure things are where they belong. Where they belong. A chill ran through me. The volunteer stepped closer now, her presence more deliberate. Is everything all right here? She asked gently. Chloe turned, her expression shifting instantly. Back to polished, back to perfect. Yes, of course, she said, with a soft smile. I was just trying to help. Help. The word I'd almost made me flinch. The volunteer's eyes moved between us. She wasn't convinced, but she didn't push. Chloe turned back to me briefly. Good luck, she said quietly. You're going to need it. Then she walked away, just like the day before. But this time, she had said too much. I stayed where I was, my hands still, my breathing slow, because now it was clear. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about manipulation. This was about control, about positioning people where she believed they belonged. And in her mind, I already knew where she intended to place me, out of the way. The volunteer approached me gently after Chloe disappeared inside the venue. Are you okay? She asked softly. I looked up at her, really looked, and for the first time since this began, I felt something steady again. Yes, I said quietly. I think I am. But inside, I knew something had shifted. The test was over. The truth was no longer hiding, and whatever came next would not be quiet. That night, I didn't bother turning on the television. I sat in the quiet of my living room, a cup of untouched tea cooling in my hands, replaying every word Chloe had spoken that afternoon. Not just the words, but the tone, the certainty, the belief behind them. Dependent, irrelevant, where they belong. It wasn't anger that kept me awake. It was clarity. There is a particular kind of danger in people who believe they are right. Not just justified, but necessary. Chloe didn't see herself as cruel. She saw herself as efficient, organized. Someone who fixed problems other people were too sentimental to face. And in her mind, I was a problem. The next morning, I called Richard before I even had breakfast. I think we're past suspicion, I said as soon as he answered. I was waiting for your call, he replied. I told him everything from the second encounter, the confrontation, the language, the slip about structure and control, the way she performed kindness the moment someone else was watching. When I finished, Richard exhaled slowly. She's consistent, he said. Yes, I replied. That's what makes it worse. Consistency means this isn't situational, he continued. It's ingrained. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. She's not reacting, I said. She's operating. There was a brief silence. And the volunteer, he asked. She witnessed part of it, I said. Not everything, but enough to understand something was wrong, good, Richard said. We may need that later. The word later lingered, because it implied something inevitable, something bigger than quiet observation. I don't want this to become a spectacle, I said quietly. It doesn't have to, he replied. But Daisy, if she's already positioning you as unstable to Ethan, we need to be prepared for escalation. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. She's already started, I admitted. What do you mean I can feel it, I said. The distance, the hesitation in his voice. He's listening to her. That's not surprising, Richard said gently. He trusts her. Yes, I said. And she knows it. Another pause. Then we need to move carefully, he said. But we also need support. I was thinking the same thing, I replied. There was one person in particular who came to mind, someone Ethan respected deeply, someone Chloe wouldn't be able to manipulate easily. I'm going to call Helen, I said. Richard didn't hesitate. That's a good move. Judge Helen Carter had been part of Ethan's life since he was a child. After Arthur passed, she became something of a steady presence, never intrusive, but always there when it mattered. Ethan trusted her judgment in a way he didn't always extend to me anymore. That thought hurt more than I cared to admit. but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about pride. It was about protection. I called her that afternoon. Daisy Helen said warmly when she answered. It's been too long. It has. I agreed. I'm sorry I'm calling out of the blue. You don't need a reason, she said, but I can hear in your voice that you have one. I smiled faintly. You always could. Tell me what's going on. So I did, carefully, clearly, without exaggeration. I told her about Chloe, about the questions, the behavior, the 2 encounters, the phone call, Marcus. I didn't rush. I let the weight of the information speak for itself. When I finished, Helen was silent for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Helen, I said, softly. I'm here, she replied. Her voice had changed. Not alarmed, measured. That's a serious set of observations, she said. I know I replied, and I wouldn't come to you if I wasn't certain. I believe that, she said immediately. The relief that washed through me was quiet but powerful. Ethan won't, I added. Not yet, she said. There was that word again. Yet. He thinks I'm overreacting, I continued. Or worse, that I'm struggling. Helen exhaled slowly. That's not uncommon, she said. It's easier to question the source than the situation, especially when emotions are involved. I don't have time for him to come around slowly, I said. If what we think is true, she's already moving forward with something. I understand, Helen said, but we have to be strategic. I'm listening. Another pause. Do you have anything recorded, she asked. Yes, I said. Part of the phone call. Not everything, but enough to raise questions. Good, she said. Hold on to that. Don't use it yet. Why not? Because timing matters, she replied. If you confront her too early, she'll deny everything and adjust her behavior. If you wait, she may reveal more. I leaned back in my chair. That's what Richard said. He's right, Helen replied. I hesitated. There's something else, I said. Go on. She's already starting to isolate me, I said quietly. Subtly, she's planting doubt in Ethan's mind. Helen didn't sound surprised. That's a classic move, she said. Undermine the strongest opposing voice before it can be heard. A chill ran through me. She called me unstable, I said. Not directly, but enough. And Ethan, Helen asked. He asked if I was taking my medication properly, I replied. The silence on the other end was heavy this time. I'm sorry, Helen said softly. So am I whispered. Because that question, it hadn't just hurt. It had broken something. I want to talk to him, Helen said after a moment. I sat up slightly. You think that will help? I think it will create space, she replied. Not confrontation, just perspective. I nodded slowly. He respects you, I said. And he loves you, she added. Yes, I said, but right now that love is being redirected. Then we guide it back, she said calmly. Her confidence steadied me. Not completely, but enough. Thank you, I said. You don't have to thank me, she replied. This is what family does. Family. The word lingered long after we ended the call. Because that was what this really came down to. Not money, not control, family, and someone trying to reshape it. That evening, Ethan called, unexpected. Hey, Mom, he said. His voice sounded tired, but there was something else there too. Tension. Hi, sweetheart, I replied. How was your day, he asked. Quiet, I said. Yours long, he admitted. There was a pause. I spoke to Chloe earlier, he added. Of course he did. And I asked carefully. She said something strange, he said. My pulse quickened slightly. What kind of strange? She mentioned seeing the same homeless woman twice. He said it felt intentional. I said nothing. She thinks the woman might be following her. He continued. Of course she does. She's probably just imagining things, I said gently. Maybe he said, but she seemed shaken. Shaken, the word almost made me laugh. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet. Mom, he said after a moment, have you been out much lately? The question hung between us, careful testing. My chest tightened. No, I said calmly. Why do you ask? No reason, he replied quickly. I just thought I'd check. I understood then. She had already started connecting the pieces. Not fully, but enough to create suspicion. And if she pushed further, if she convinced him, everything could fall apart before I had the chance to show him the truth. I'm fine, Ethan, I said gently. You don't need to worry about me." "I know," he said. But his voice wasn't as certain as it used to be. After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet once again. But this time, the silence felt different, tighter, more urgent, because now it wasn't just about exposing Chloe. It was about staying one step ahead of her, and for the first time since this began, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. She wasn't just dangerous. She was smart, and she was already adjusting. The dinner was supposed to be simple. That's how Chloe described it when Ethan invited me. Just something small, he said over the phone. Chloe thought it would be nice for us to spend time together. No pressure. No pressure. I almost smiled when he said it. Because by then I understood something clearly. Nothing Chloe did was without purpose. Especially not something that involved all three of us in the same room. Still, I agreed, not because I trusted her, but because I needed to see how far she was willing to go. When I arrived at Ethan's house that evening, everything was perfect. Of course it was. The table was set with elegant precision soft candlelight, carefully arranged plates, a meal that looked like it had come from a magazine rather than a kitchen. Chloe greeted me at the door with a warm smile, her expression calm, composed. "Daisy," she said gently, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "I'm so glad you came." Her tone was flawless. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have believed her. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, matching her calm. Ethan appeared a moment later, wrapping me in a quick hug. "Hey, Mom." His voice was warm, but there was tension beneath it. Subtle, but there. We sat down shortly after. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. Conversation flowed easily. Chloe asked about my week, Ethan talked about a case at the hospital, and I listened, contributing where I could. Anyone watching from the outside would have seen a family, a future, but underneath it, something else was building. I felt it in the pauses, in the way Chloe's eyes lingered just a second too long when I spoke, in the way Ethan avoided certain topics. And then, as if on cue, Chloe set her fork down. I wanted to mention something she said lightly. There it was. I kept my expression neutral. "Of course," I replied. She glanced at Ethan briefly before continuing. "It's probably nothing," she said, her tone soft, almost hesitant. "But I had a strange experience the last couple of days." Ethan frowned slightly. "What kind of experience?" Chloe let out a small breath as if deciding whether or not to continue. "I think someone might be following me." The words hung in the air, carefully chosen, deliberately fragile. Ethan's posture shifted immediately. "What he said? What do you mean?" "I'm not sure," she replied, shaking her head slightly. "It could be a coincidence, but I saw the same woman twice, near the boutique and then again by the church." I kept my hands still in my lap, my breathing steady. She approached me. Both times, Chloe continued, asking for help, food, directions. Ethan looked concerned now. Did she do anything else? Chloe hesitated. Just enough. "She made me uncomfortable," she said quietly, not just because of the situation, but the way she looked at me, like she was watching me. Watching. The word was intentional. I could feel it. Ethan turned to me. "Have you heard anything about this?" he asked. His voice wasn't accusatory. Not yet, but it was searching. Careful. I shook my head gently. "No," I said. Chloe's eyes flickered toward me. Just for a second, then back to Ethan. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it," she said softly. "But when it happened twice..." I started to feel uneasy. "Of course you did. You should have told me sooner," Ethan said, his voice tightening. "I didn't want to worry you," she replied, reaching for his hand. He took it, instinctively. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know. He was already leaning toward her, already protecting her. "I just think we should be careful," she added, "especially with everything coming up. The wedding, the future, the timing, all of it woven into a single quiet suggestion." Ethan nodded. "Of course," he said. "We'll figure it out, then..." He looked at me again, and this time there was something else in his eyes. Uncertainty. "Mom," he said slowly, "are you sure you haven't seen anyone like that around your neighborhood?" There it was, the shift. Subtle, but undeniable. I met his gaze calmly. "I'm sure," I said. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Chloe broke it gently. "I'm probably overthinking it," she said with a small, self-conscious smile. "I just didn't like the feeling." Ethan squeezed her hand. "You're not overthinking," he said. "If something feels off, it's worth paying attention to." I almost spoke then. Almost told him everything, but I didn't, because I could see it clearly now. If I said anything in that moment, he wouldn't hear it. Not really. He would hear Chloe's version of events, her fear, her vulnerability, and my words would become something else. Suspicion, instability, exactly what she wanted. So I stayed quiet and let her continue. I just think Chloe added carefully that sometimes people aren't who they seem, and it's important to recognize that before it becomes a problem. The words were aimed at Ethan, but they landed on me. A warning. Disguised as concern, I set my fork down slowly. "I agree," I said, and both of them looked at me. "It is important to recognize people for who they truly are," I continued calmly. For a brief moment, Chloe's smile faltered, just slightly, but it was enough. Ethan didn't notice. He rarely noticed those small things, but I did, because I was watching her now, the way she had been watching me. Dinner continued after that, but the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer light, no longer casual. There was tension beneath every word, every glance, and Chloe knew it. I could see it in the way she adjusted her tone, softening here, laughing there, rebalancing the room. She was good, very good. By the time dessert was served, everything looked normal again, but it wasn't, because something had shifted, not in her, in him. After dinner, Ethan walked me to the door. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice softer now. "I hope that didn't feel strange." I looked at him, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who now stood in front of me, unsure of where to place his trust. "It was fine," I said gently. He nodded. There was a pause. "Chloe's just been a little stressed," he added, "with the wedding and everything." "I understand," I said. He hesitated. "Mom, if something was wrong, you'd tell me, right?" The question caught me off guard, not because of what he asked, because of how he asked it. Carefully, like he wasn't sure what answer he wanted. I stepped closer and placed my hand lightly on his arm. "Always," I said, and I meant it, even if it cost me everything. He nodded again, but there was still something unsettled in his expression. "I just want everyone to be okay," he said. "I know," I replied softly. As I walked to my car, I felt it clearly. The shift. Chloe had made her move. Not aggressive, not obvious, but effective. She had planted doubt, and worse, she had done it in a way that made me look like the uncertainty. As I sat behind the wheel, one thought settled heavily in my mind. This wasn't just a game of truth anymore. It was a game of timing, and if I didn't act carefully, she wouldn't just win. She would rewrite the entire story. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was restless, but because my mind refused to slow down. Chloe's voice at dinner, the way she had framed the story, the careful hesitation, the subtle redirection. Every word had been placed with intention like pieces on a board I hadn't realized we were both playing on. And Ethan, that was what stayed with me the most. The way he had looked at me. Not with doubt, not fully, but with something dangerously close to it. I had waited too long. That thought came to me just before dawn, and once it did, it didn't leave. I had given Chloe space to reveal herself, and she had. But in that same space, she had begun reshaping the narrative, positioning herself as vulnerable, positioning me as uncertain. If I waited any longer, she wouldn't just defend herself. She would control the outcome. At 7:12 a.m., I called Richard. He answered immediately. "You didn't sleep either," he said. "No," I replied. "Good," he said, "because I have something." I sat up straight. "What is it?" There was a brief pause, just long enough to tell me it mattered. I confirmed the connection, he said. "Marcus Bennett is Chloe's brother." No question. I closed my eyes. I knew it. "It gets worse," Richard continued. "Of course it does," I thought. "There was a case about 3 years ago," he said. "An elderly widow, Margaret Hensley. Significant assets. No immediate family. She became involved with a younger man. Shortly after, a woman entered the picture presented as a friend, helping coordinate care and financial organization. My chest tightened. "Chloe," I said quietly. "Yes," he confirmed. Not officially named in the case, but her presence was documented in statements. "What happened?" Richard exhaled slowly. The widow began transferring access small at first, then larger. Accounts, authorizations. Nothing illegal on paper, but clearly influenced. And then a distant relative intervened, he said, raised concerns. Legal pressure followed. The situation collapsed before it went further. No charges were filed, not enough evidence. I pressed my fingers against my temple. "But enough to establish a pattern," I said. "Yes." The word settled heavily, because that was what this was. Not coincidence, not misunderstanding, pattern. "And Marcus?" I asked. "He was connected financially," Richard said, indirectly. Funds moving through shell accounts. Again, nothing that held up in court, but enough to raise serious questions. I stood slowly pacing across the room. "They've done this before." "Yes, and now they're doing it again. That appears to be the case." I stopped walking, and this time, "It's my son." The silence on the line said everything. "Yes," Richard said quietly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Tell me about the documents," I said. Another pause. "He's already signed preliminary agreements," Richard said. My heart dropped. "What kind of agreements?" "Joint financial positioning," he replied. "Nothing irreversible yet, but it's a step, a significant one." I closed my eyes. "She's moving faster than we thought." "Yes. And the wedding?" I asked. "Likely the final step," he said. "Legal merging, shared access, increased influence." I leaned against the wall, the weight of it pressing down. "She's not just marrying him," I said. "She's securing him. That's one way to put it." I let out a slow breath. "No," I said. "That's exactly what she's doing." For a moment, neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to soften. No way to reinterpret this. This was real, and it was already in motion. "What do we do?" I asked. Richard didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. "We stop it. Simple, direct, but not easy." How I asked. "Not by confronting her privately," he said. "She'll deny everything. She's already prepared for that." "I know," I replied. "She's too careful." "Exactly," he said, "which means we need to remove her control over the narrative." I understood what he meant, but I didn't like it. "You're talking about something public," I said. "Yes." I shook my head slightly. "That will destroy Ethan." "It might," Richard said, "but letting this continue will destroy him more." The truth of that settled deep, painful, but undeniable. "She's already isolating you," he continued. "If we wait, she'll solidify that position. By the time you act, he may not listen at all." I knew he was right. I hated that he was right. "There has to be another way," I said. "There might be," he replied, "but it will take time, and time is exactly what she's using against you." I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. Arthur would have known what to do, or at least, he would have helped me carry it. But this was mine now, and I couldn't afford to hesitate. "I need more than suspicion," I said finally. "Even now, I need something he can't ignore." "You're going to get it," Richard said. "How?" "We keep going," he replied. "One more step, one more piece of confirmation." I turned back toward the room. "What do you have in mind?" There was a pause. "Then I've requested access to some communication records," he said. "Nothing illegal, just patterns, timing, contact frequency. And if Chloe and Marcus are coordinating, we'll see it," he said, "especially around key moments, like the boutique, the call, the dinner." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said. "And Daisy," he added, "there's something else." I waited. "She's already pushing him toward larger commitments," he said. "Not just financial, emotional, dependence." I felt that, at dinner, in his voice, in the way he defended her without realizing it. She told him he's easy to trust, didn't she? Richard asked. I froze. "How did you—" "It's part of the pattern," he said. "Reinforce the trait, then use it." A cold wave moved through me. "She said something like that," I admitted. "Yes," he said, "they always do. They, not she, they. That was what made it worse. This wasn't just Chloe. This was a system, a method, a partnership. And Ethan was walking straight into it." I won't let this happen, I said quietly. I know you won't, Richard replied. After we ended the call, I stood in silence for a long time because everything had changed. Before this was suspicion, then it became concern. Now, it was certainty. Chloe Bennett wasn't just the wrong woman for my son. She was a threat, and if I didn't act soon, he wouldn't just lose a relationship, he would lose control of his life. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't hesitate. Helen, I said when she answered. Yes, I'm ready, I said. There was a brief pause. For what she asked, I took a breath. To end this. Silence. Then all right, she said calmly. Then we do it properly. I looked out the window again. The world outside looked exactly the same. Quiet, orderly, unaware. But inside, everything had shifted. Because now there was no more waiting, no more testing, no more doubt, only action. And the understanding that what I was about to do would change everything. The decision to expose someone publicly is not one you make lightly, at least, not if you still believe in dignity. I had spent most of my life avoiding unnecessary spectacle. Arthur and I built everything quietly, carefully, without drawing attention we didn't need. Even in conflict, we preferred resolution over display. But this was different. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about proving I was right. It was about stopping something before it reached a point where it couldn't be undone. And according to everything Richard had uncovered, that point was closer than I wanted to admit. We met the next morning in his office. Helen was already there when I arrived. She stood by the window, her posture straight. Her presence calm but unmistakably firm, the kind of presence that comes from decades of making decisions that affect people's lives. Daisy, she said, turning toward me, you look tired. I didn't sleep, I admitted. Good, she said. Neither did we. There was no comfort in her tone, only focus. I took a seat across from Richard's desk. Tell me everything I said. Richard slid a folder toward me. We've confirmed consistent communication between Chloe and Marcus, he said. Timing aligns with key interactions before your encounters after major conversations with Ethan and late at night. I opened the folder slowly. Call logs, message timestamps, patterns, not content but enough to show coordination. She's not acting alone, I said quietly. No, Richard replied, and she never was. Helen stepped closer. This is enough to establish intent, she said. Not legally, not yet, but strategically. I looked up at her. What do you mean? It means, she continued, you're not dealing with isolated behavior. You're dealing with a coordinated approach to influence and control. I exhaled slowly. I already knew that, I said. Yes, she replied. But now you can prove it. I closed the folder, and proving it means exposing it. Yes, the word felt heavier this time. Because now, it was real. When I asked, Richard and Helen exchanged a brief glance. Soon, Richard said. Before the wedding. How soon, Helen answered. The rehearsal dinner. I felt my chest tighten. That's public. Yes, she said calmly, which is exactly why it works. I shook my head slightly. That will humiliate Ethan. It might, she said. But it will also protect him. I looked down at my hands. There it was again. The impossible balance. Protect him or spare him. But I already knew the truth. I couldn't do both. What exactly would happen, I asked. Richard leaned forward slightly. You don't accuse, he said. You present. Present what facts, he replied. Your experience, the recordings, the pattern of communication, witnesses. Witnesses, I repeated. The volunteer from the church, Helen said, and Gloria if necessary. Anyone who can confirm behavior, not interpretation. I nodded slowly. And Chloe, I asked. She'll deny it, Richard said, at first. And then Helen's expression didn't change. She'll adapt, she said, but under pressure. People like her tend to reveal more than they intend. I swallowed. And Ethan. Neither of them answered immediately, because that was the hardest part. He'll resist, Helen said, finally, at first. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he will. He's emotionally invested, she continued, and she's already positioned you as unstable. You need to be prepared for that. I am, I said. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't. Not completely, because no amount of preparation could soften what it would feel like to see my son look at me like that, again. And Daisy Richard added, "You only get one chance at this." I looked at him. "What do you mean? If you move too early without enough support, she'll recover," he said. "If you move too late, she'll secure what she wants. This has to be precise, controlled, deliberate, just like her." I let out a slow breath. "Then we do it right," I said. Helen nodded. "Yes," she said, "we do it right." The rest of the meeting was details, careful, structured, necessary details, what I would say, what I wouldn't. How to present the information without sounding emotional or reactive, where to stand, who would speak after me, how to handle escalation. It felt less like a family situation and more like a case. And maybe that's what it had become. By the time I left Richard's office, the plan was clear. Rehearsal dinner, full presence, no hesitation. I would stand in front of everyone, friends, colleagues, people Ethan respected, and tell the truth. Not all of it at once, but enough. Enough to break the illusion. Enough to make denial impossible. That evening, I sat alone in my house. The same house Chloe had walked through with polite admiration. The same house she had evaluated without realizing I was watching her back. I walked slowly from room to room, not out of habit, out of reflection, because I knew, after this, things would change. Not just with Chloe, with Ethan, with me, with everything. I stopped in the living room, my gaze settling on a framed photograph. Arthur, Ethan, and me, years ago, before everything became complicated, before I had to choose between protecting my son and being understood by him. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," I whispered. The silence didn't answer, but it didn't need to, because deep down, I already knew. Later that night, Ethan called. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded softer than the night before, tired but open. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm all right," I said. There was a pause. "I've been thinking," he added. My heart tightened slightly. "About what?" Everything he said. "You, Chloe, the tension." I stayed quiet. "I don't like it," he continued. "I don't like feeling like I'm in the middle of something I don't fully understand." I closed my eyes briefly. "You're not in the middle," I said gently. "You're at the center." He exhaled. "That's exactly what it feels like." Another pause. "Mom, if there's something I should know, I need you to tell me." There it was. The opening. The moment I had been waiting for. And yet, I didn't take it. Not yet. "Soon," I said softly. "Soon," he repeated. "Yes," I said, "I promise." He hesitated. "Okay," he said, finally, but I could hear it. The uncertainty, the confusion, and beneath it, the trust that hadn't fully disappeared. Not yet. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet once more, but this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, focused, because everything was set, the plan was in place, the truth was ready, and there was no turning back. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The rehearsal dinner was 2 days away. 2 days, 48 hours. That was all the time left before everything changed. And as I sat there, one thought settled clearly in my mind. This wasn't just about exposing Chloe. It was about reclaiming my son. Before she took him somewhere I couldn't follow. The rehearsal dinner was everything Chloe would have wanted. Elegant, controlled, perfectly orchestrated. It was held in a private dining room at one of Charleston's most exclusive waterfront restaurants, the kind of place where the lighting is soft, the voices are low, and everything from the silverware to the seating arrangement feels intentional. Of course she had chosen it. Of course she had curated every detail. When I arrived, the room was already alive with conversation. Ethan's colleagues, a few close friends, extended acquaintances, people who mattered, people whose opinions carried weight. Chloe stood near the center, radiant in a deep blue dress, greeting guests with effortless charm. Her smile was warm, her posture confident, her voice light and engaging. She looked flawless. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have been proud. Instead, I felt something else. Resolve. Ethan spotted me first. "Mom," he said, walking over quickly, "you made it." I smiled gently. Of course I did. He hugged me a little tighter than usual. "You look "Good," he said, as if searching for the right words. "So do you," I replied. And he did. Handsome, composed, hopeful. That was the hardest part, because I knew what was about to happen, and I knew it would take that hope and fracture it. Chloe approached a moment later. "Daisy," she said, her tone warm, her smile perfectly in place. "I'm so glad you're here." I met her eyes. For just a second, the mask slipped. Not completely, but enough. She knew something was coming. Not what, but something. "Thank you for having me," I said calmly. Her gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned back to the room, resuming her role. Dinner began shortly after. Courses were served. Toasts were made. Laughter filled the room. From the outside, it was everything a celebration should be. Inside, I felt the seconds passing, counting down. I barely touched my food. Instead, I watched. Chloe moved effortlessly between conversations, adjusting her tone, her posture, her expressions depending on who she was speaking to. She was good, very good, but I wasn't watching her performance anymore. I was watching for cracks, and I saw them, small ones. A flicker of tension when I spoke. A brief glance toward Marcus, who stood near the back of the room, quieter than the others, but present, always present. Ethan eventually stood to give a short speech. "Thank you all for being here." He said, his voice steady but emotional. "This means a lot to us, to me." He glanced at Chloe. She smiled back, soft and encouraging. "I know I've been busy," he continued, earning a few light laughs, "but finding Chloe has been the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." My chest tightened, because I knew what came next would take that belief away. "I feel like everything is finally coming together," he said, "like I'm building something real, something lasting." I closed my eyes for just a second, then opened them again. It was time. As the applause faded, I stood. The movement was subtle at first, just enough to draw attention. Daisy, Ethan said, surprised, "Did you want to say something?" All eyes turned toward me. The room quieted. This was it. I stepped forward slowly, my hands steady at my sides. "Yes," I said calmly, "I would." Chloe's smile remained, but her eyes sharpened. "Before we continue celebrating," I said, my voice clear but not loud, "there's something I need to share." A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. Ethan frowned slightly. "Mom, maybe." "It won't take long," I said gently. He hesitated, then nodded. I took another step forward. "I've spent most of my life believing that you can understand a person by how they treat others," I began. "Not the people who matter, not the people who can offer something in return, but the people who have nothing to give." The room was silent now, listening. I wanted to believe, I continued, that the woman my son is about to marry shared that belief. Chloe's posture stiffened just slightly, but I wasn't sure I said, so I decided to find out. Ethan's expression shifted. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I met his eyes. "I disguised myself," I said calmly, "as someone she wouldn't recognize, someone she wouldn't value." A murmur moved through the room. Confusion, disbelief. Chloe didn't move. Not yet. I approached her. I continued. Twice. Once outside a boutique. Once near a church. Ethan's face went pale. "No," he said quietly. Chloe spoke then. "That's ridiculous," she said, her tone controlled but firm. "I don't know what you think you're—" I asked her for help, I said, cutting through her words. Food, directions, nothing more. The room grew still again. "And she responded," I added. Chloe's jaw tightened. "I don't engage with strangers who make me uncomfortable," she said. "That's not a crime." "No, I agreed. It isn't." I paused. Then, but what she said matters. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. "I recorded part of our interaction," I said. Chloe's eyes flickered, just for a second, then back to calm. "That's invasive," she said quickly, and completely out of context. "Then let's give it context," I replied. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, cold, clear, unmistakable. "People like you are exactly why society never improves." A collective silence followed, heavier than before. I didn't look at Chloe, I looked at Ethan. His face had changed. Not fully, but enough. "That's not," Chloe began. "There's more," I said. I turned slightly. Is there someone here who volunteered at the church on Tuesday? I asked. A woman near the side of the room stepped forward slowly. I did, she said. Did you witness this interaction? I asked. She nodded. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Chloe's composure cracked. Excuse me, she snapped. You don't even know me. I know what I saw, the woman replied calmly. And I know what I heard, I added. I picked up the phone again. There's another recording, I said. Chloe's eyes widened slightly. This one is a phone call. I pressed play. Her voice again. Different this time, sharper, more calculating. The old woman might change the paperwork. He'll sign what I put in front of him. The room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Something broke. Turn that off, Chloe said, her voice tight. I didn't. Once it's done, it's done. The recording ended. Silence. Complete. Total. I looked at Ethan. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at her. And for the first time, he wasn't certain. Silence has a weight to it. Not the peaceful kind. Not the quiet you choose. This was the kind that presses down on a room, settles into people's chests, and forces them to confront something they were not prepared to see. That was the silence that followed the recording. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were on Chloe. And for the first time since I had known her, she had no script. Turn that off, she repeated, her voice sharper, now less controlled. But it was already off. The damage had been done. I stood still, my hands calm at my sides, even though my heart was pounding harder than it had all night. This was the moment, not the reveal, the aftermath, because this was where truth either held or collapsed. Ethan was still staring at her. Not with anger, not yet. With disbelief. Chloe, he said slowly. What is that? Her eyes flickered toward him. And just like that, she shifted, tears, soft, immediate, controlled. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling just enough. That's not what it sounds like. Of course. Denial, then confusion, then redirection. It's out of context, she continued quickly. Anyone can take pieces of a conversation and twist them. I watched her carefully. The speed, the precision, she wasn't panicking, she was adjusting. What context makes that acceptable? I asked calmly. Her gaze snapped toward me. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said, her voice rising slightly. You've been watching me, following me, recording me without my consent. This is obsessive Daisy. There it was, the pivot. Make me the problem. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The tension was thick now. You approached me, I said, twice. Because you made me feel unsafe, she shot back. You showed up in the same places asking questions, watching me. What was I supposed to think? I didn't respond immediately, because I could feel it, the room tilting, just slightly, not toward her, but away from certainty. That was her strength. She didn't need to convince everyone. Just enough. Just long enough. Chloe, Ethan said, his voice firmer now. Just answer the question. She turned to him, her expression softening instantly. I am answering, she said gently. You just have to trust me. Trust. The word hung in the air, but this time, it didn't land the same way. Ethan hesitated. And in that hesitation, something cracked. What about the old woman? He asked quietly. Her smile faltered, barely, but enough. I don't know what she's referring to, Chloe said quickly. I don't even know when that was recorded. Tuesday, I said. She ignored me. It could be anything she insisted. A client, a situation. You have no idea what I deal with in my work. That was good, convincing. If you didn't know her pattern. But I did. Then explain this, I said, turning slightly toward Richard. He stepped forward, calmly placing the folder on the table. Chloe Bennett, he said evenly, we have documented communication between you and Marcus Bennett. Your brother aligned with the timing of these recordings. The room shifted again, this time more sharply. Chloe froze. Just for a second, then she laughed, a short, sharp sound. This is unbelievable, she said. You brought a lawyer. I am her attorney, Richard replied calmly, and you're harassing me with private information. She snapped. Publicly accessible patterns, he corrected. Nothing illegal, just consistent. Her eyes darted briefly toward Marcus. That was the moment. Small but critical, because everyone saw it. Marcus, Ethan repeated, turning slowly. You're here. Marcus straightened slightly, clearly uncomfortable now. I didn't think this was necessary, he muttered. Necessary, Ethan echoed. What is going on? Chloe stepped forward quickly. Nothing is going on, she said firmly. This is a setup. That's all this is. But her voice had changed. Not controlled anymore. Tight, pressed. You're lying, I said quietly. Her head snapped toward me. No, she said sharply, you are. And then she broke. Not emotionally, strategically. You think you're protecting him, she said, her voice rising. You think this is about love. The room held its breath. You don't know him, she continued, gesturing toward Ethan. You don't see what I see, Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Chloe turned to him fully now. He's exhausted, she said. He's overwhelmed. He's been carrying everything, his work, his responsibilities, you, for years. My chest tightened. Chloe, he began. No, she cut in. You deserve someone who helps you, who supports you, who actually understands what it takes to build something stable. Stable, controlled, structured, the same language. You made it easy, she added, softer now, almost regretful. You wanted to trust me. The words landed like a blow, because they weren't defensive, they were honest. Ethan stepped back slightly. What are you saying? He asked. Chloe exhaled slowly, and for the first time, she didn't try to fix it. She didn't soften it. She didn't hide. I'm saying, she replied, that you needed someone like me. Silence, heavy, final, and you needed someone like me to fix things before they got messy. There it was. No denial, no apology, just truth. Cold, unfiltered. Ethan stared at her. The disbelief was gone now, replaced by something worse. Understanding. You were planning something, he said, not a question. A realization. Chloe didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marcus shifted again, clearly ready to leave. This is over, he muttered. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. It is. Chloe looked at him then. Really looked. And for a brief moment, something flickered. Not love, not regret, calculation. But it was too late. You should go, Ethan said. Her expression hardened. You're making a mistake, she said. No, he replied. I already did. That was the moment, the final break. Chloe straightened her composure, returning just enough to hold her dignity. Fine, she said, if that's what you want. She turned. Marcus followed. And just like that, they were gone. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to recover, only absence. The room remained silent for a long time. No one spoke, no one moved, because everyone understood what had just happened, not just a confrontation, an unraveling. Stood there staring at the door, his shoulders slightly slumped, his breathing uneven. I wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but I didn't, because this part he had to face on his own. After a few moments, the guest began to shift quietly, offering soft words, uncertain glances, respectful distance. Eventually, it was just us, Ethan and me. He didn't turn around. Mom, he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. The words broke something in me, not because I needed them, but because of what they cost him to say. I stepped forward slowly. You don't need to apologize, I said gently. Yes, he said, I do. He turned then, and I saw it. Not just pain, not just shock, guilt. I didn't see it, he said. I didn't want to. I placed my hand lightly on his arm. That doesn't make you weak, I said. It makes me stupid, he replied. No, I said firmly, it makes you human. He let out a shaky breath. She was right about one thing, he said quietly. I frowned slightly. What I did want to trust her. I nodded. I know. He looked at me then, and this time, there was no doubt, no distance, just truth, and the beginning of something else. Healing. The days after the rehearsal dinner felt strangely quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence I'd lived with before. This was different. Lighter, but fragile. Like the air after a storm clear, but still carrying the memory of what had just passed through. Ethan stayed with me that night. He didn't say much at first. After the guests left, after the staff cleared the room, after everything that had been carefully constructed fell apart, he simply followed me home, not as a doctor, not as a man trying to hold everything together, as my son. We sat in the living room for a long time without speaking. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor as if the answers might be written there. I didn't rush him. I had learned over the years that some realizations need space, and this one was too big to force. I keep replaying it, he said finally, his voice low. Everything she said, everything I missed. I nodded gently. That's natural. He shook his head. No, he said, it's not just that, it's how obvious it feels now. That was the hardest part of truth, not discovering it, recognizing how long it had been there. I thought I was being careful, he continued. I thought I was protecting myself, making good decisions. You were, I said softly. He looked up at me. No, he said. I wasn't. I was choosing what I wanted to see. I didn't argue, because he was right, but he didn't need to punish himself for it. That doesn't make you wrong, I said. It makes you hopeful. He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Hopeful got me here. Yes, I said. But it also made you who you are. He didn't respond to that, not immediately, but I saw something shift in his expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but something softer than blame. Over the next few weeks, things moved forward in ways I hadn't expected, not quickly, but steadily. Richard handled the legal side. From what he told me, Chloe and Marcus didn't try to fight anything publicly. No lawsuits, no attempts to challenge what had been revealed. That in itself said everything. People who believe they can win, fight. People who know they've been exposed, disappear. And that's exactly what they did, quietly, completely. Ethan received a few messages at first. Explanations, half apologies, attempts to reframe what had happened. He didn't respond, not once. And after a while, the messages stopped, just like everything else. Gone. As if they had never been there, but the impact remained, not just in what had been lost, but in what needed to be rebuilt. Ethan started therapy. That was his decision. I need to understand why I didn't see it, he told me one afternoon. You will, I said. He nodded. I don't want this to happen again. It won't, I replied gently. Not the same way. He looked at me carefully. What do you mean? I smiled slightly. Because now, you know what to look for. That didn't erase the pain, but it gave it purpose, and that mattered. For me, things changed too, not in ways I expected. The disguise the days I spent being someone invisible stayed with me. Long after the clothes were gone, long after the test was over, I couldn't forget it. The way people looked through me, the way they stepped around me without acknowledgement. The way one kind voice could feel like something extraordinary, simply because it was rare. So I went back, not as part of a plan, not as a test, as myself. The church welcomed me without question. The same volunteer who had stood beside me that day smiled when she saw me. You came back, she said. I did, I replied. Different circumstances, she asked gently. I smiled. Yes, I said, very different. I started helping where I could, serving food, listening, being present. Not as Daisy Whitmore, the businesswoman, not as Ethan's mother, just as someone who understood a little more than she had before. And in that space, I found something unexpected. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. Ethan joined me once. A few weeks later, he didn't say much at first, just observed, watched, the same way I had. Afterward, as we walked to the car, he spoke. I didn't know, he said quietly. Most people don't, I replied. He nodded. I want to come back. I looked at him. You should, I said. And he did. Not every day, not every week, but enough. Enough to remind himself of what mattered. Enough to stay grounded. Our relationship, it didn't go back to what it was. It became something else. Stronger in some ways, more honest in others. We talked more openly, listened more carefully, and slowly, the distance Chloe had created began to disappear. Not all at once, but piece by piece. One evening, months later, we sat on the porch watching the sun set, the same way Arthur and I used to. Ethan leaned back in his chair, quiet for a while. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. What I said. The test, he replied. Everything you did. I thought about it. Not quickly, not carelessly. No, I said finally. He nodded slowly. Even knowing what it cost, I looked at him. It didn't cost me you, I said. He didn't answer right away. Then he smiled just slightly. No, he said, it didn't. We sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was complete. Because some truths don't just reveal themselves. They change you, shape you, force you to see things you once ignored, and sometimes they save you, not in the way you expect, but in the way you need. I leaned back in my chair watching the light fade, and for the first time in a long time I felt certain of something again. Not about people, not about the future, but about myself. I had trusted my instincts, I had protected my son, and even when it hurt, I had chosen truth. And that was something I would never regret. Life has a quiet way of revealing people not through what they say, but through how they treat those who can offer them nothing in return. Kindness isn't a performance. It isn't reserved for the right audience or the right moment. It shows up in the smallest interactions, in the spaces where no one is watching, or where we think no one important is watching. I learned that the hard way. I also learned that real love sometimes requires difficult choices. It requires standing firm when it would be easier to stay silent. It requires risking misunderstanding to protect something deeper. And most importantly, I learned that strength doesn't disappear with age. It evolves. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect someone you love, I'd really like to hear your story. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the truth needs to be told more than once.